We have the corporate sector, which feels like it can go wherever it wants, is unbridled, and has no restraint placed around it. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were in the 80s. And we're now waking up to say it's time to start kicking ass? That's 30 years since the dismantling of the social welfare state began. What do we see today? In your own documents, we talk about the various attacks on equality rights. Whether or not it's the Court Challenges program, I always find it funny when they say that I'm associated with the Court Challenge. I was a member. I don't think there is a Court Challenges program anymore, except for, well, no, we know what's happened to it. It was certainly something the Harper government had said before it came to power that it took aim at. We can read Tom Flanagan or listen to him. They made it really clear. It was on the block. The proposed amendments to immigration laws to deal with immigration smuggling, which most reputed lawyers who deal with immigration issues say is A, bad law, number one, B, probably would not pass a charter test despite the protestations of Jason Kenney, and so on. Yet it's happening in our face. And we cutting funding for women's organizations we know very well, and I'm sure I can see a lot of women in this room, and I would suspect that you see it on a day-to-day basis, the impact of these funding cuts. And how does it get typified? You get a woman senator who says to women's organizations, when it comes to dealing with Stephen Harper, quote unquote, shut the fuck up. Right? Shame. This is outrageous. This is really outrageous that you would have a senator say, don't speak truth to power. Don't do what you're supposed to be doing, which is speaking up for equality rights of over 50% of the population. Looking at the Center for Human Rights and what happened with the death of the executive director because of the harassment of Harper appointees, and the embarrassment internationally of this organization that was founded in the 80s, first chaired, I understand, by Ed Broadbent, and now is in disarray. The challenge to democratic functions, I can keep going on. How much more do we need? Proroguing Parliament twice, both on issues of democracy, right? One, the attempt to cut funding to opposition parties. That's a challenge to democracy. The second, because a whistleblower decided to reveal information about how we were treating Afghan detainees. And the committee examining it wanted to get to the heart of the matter, wanted to get at some documents the government didn't want to release. And what happens? Parliament gets prorogued. It is still the government of the day. Obviously, the political leaders, whether Ignatieff or Leighton or Giuseppe, may have some difficulties in calling an election because the political obstacles are, you look at the polls, who's going to get a majority, or we're going to continue with a conservative minority. I guess the question for us is, when do we tell them all, wake up here, we can no longer deal with this indecisiveness, we can no longer deal with a creeping right-wing conservative agenda that's coming through a minority government that's undermining the social welfare state in a way that a majority government would probably have a difficult time doing. This is probably one of the most important forms of social information that we need to identify disparity in our society and to make recommendations on how equity actually means something in real life. Yet the census is gone. Where was the outrage? You know, I'm looking at the medical establishment saying we need the census. I'm looking at city planners saying we need the census. Where are our communities? Where is the labor movement? This tool, which I've been using for about 30 years, frankly, helps us identify exactly where communities are and to think of ways to meet their needs based upon this evidence. And now it's going to be gone. Their desire to build more prisons in a time when crime is down. Do we really need to recall what happened in the United States when they decided on mandatory sentencing? This wasn't because crime was a problem. This was because the private sector was interested in prisons, and they needed clients. Judges could no longer pass discretionary sentences. They had to have statutory minimums. That's how you work in the private sector. You need to be sure that people are going to be staying in your hotel. The gun registry. You know, it's, again, we're relying on chiefs of police to say to the federal government, we need this. And it was interesting, one day I was listening to a report from a Toronto police officer who was talking about why the gun registry was important. He said in a lot of domestic situations, guns come out. And they need to know that before they go in. A, because it's likely a woman who's on the other side of the gun. And B, they want to make sure, and it's probably their first instance, that they don't get shot in the process. Yet, there's this whole thing about, well, you know, it's a cultural thing in some communities. And even members of the NDP were having some difficulties. I watched the NDP leader, Jack Layton, being sort of cross-examined by a CBC reporter one day as he danced around why he could not call party discipline to vote this down. Need change now and stop the fooling around. We can no longer wait. What vision do we see for the future? Is it possible to begin to think about restoring the welfare state? Is it possible to talk about what a caring society means in concrete terms? That people should not be going to bed hungry, that people should not be going to bed without shelter, that people should have adequate housing,